Imagine, your town has just been hit by a massive natural disaster. The president steps up to the podium, a federal sort of emergency is declared, and the whole national response machinery just kicks into gear.
Right. Everyone has a very specific visual for that exact moment.
Yeah, exactly. You picture, like, heavy lift helicopters cutting through the sky, those endless pallets of bottled water on the tarmac, maybe the National Guard rolling down Main Street. We can all easily visualize the physical muscle of disaster relief.
Oh, absolutely. The physical stuff is highly visible. But the money and the water, I mean, that's really just the fuel.
Right, and that's the thing. How does the government actually mobilize the sheer specialized brainpower required to, say, look at a collapsed hospital and mathematically determine how to rebuild it? But you can't just throw federal funding at a shattered highway and expect the concrete to pour itself.
No, definitely not. The engine for all of this is a highly specialized, intensely orchestrated human apparatus. And, the procurement documents we are examining today, they basically give us the blueprints to that exact engine.
Yeah, which is why today's deep dive is pulling from a fascinating stack of those very blueprints. We're looking directly at iterative drafts of the performance work statement from FEMA.
Yeah.
Specifically for the Public Assistance, Technical Assistance Contract 6, or, PA-TAC 6 as they call it.
Right. It's a mouthful, but it's crucial.
It really is.
Yeah.
Our mission here is to strip away all that dense government procurement language to reveal the massive infrastructure that actually makes disaster recovery possible. And having multiple iterations of these drafts is incredibly revealing, don't you think?
Oh, totally. Because we aren't just reading static rules, right? We are watching the federal government actively recalibrate its strategy in real time.
Right, like in the earlier versions, they plan to award up to 10 contracts spread across 5 distinct geographic zones.
Exactly. But by the time we get to the later drafts, they've consolidated drastically. They end up capping the whole program at a maximum of 5 vendors total.
Wow, just 5.
Yeah. And that consolidation signals a massive shift in how they view vendor management. I mean, handling 10 different contractors across all these fractured zones, it creates a lot of administrative friction.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So by having the number of prime vendors, the government is basically demanding a much higher level of scalability and centralized control from the firms that actually win these bids.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to truly understand how FEMA operates on the ground, we have to look closely at the specific human capital being mandated. When the federal response arrives, it is not just some generic workforce.
No, not at all.
It's a highly curated technical army. And the rostering requirements forced onto these 5 prime vendors are, honestly, incredibly aggressive. Like, the updated draft dictates a minimum of 100 full-time equivalents, or FTEs, to be rostered and ready to go.
Right, and that number is actually dialed down from 125 in the earlier draft.
Which aligns perfectly with that shift toward a leaner, more centralized deployment model you just mentioned.
Exactly. And the specificity of that roster is really what makes this contract so demanding. The government isn't just asking for 100 warm bodies, They are mandating a precise architectural makeup for this force.
Yeah, and you see the foundational roles immediately. Like,
Right.
The prime contractor has to guarantee a baseline of 20 civil engineers, 14 project managers, and 10 construction managers, which, given the structural demands of a post-disaster environment, those numbers make completely logical sense.
Absolutely. You need the builders and the managers.
Right. But scrolling further down the mandatory labor categories, the list pivots into some incredibly niche territory. I mean, we are talking mandatory slots for archaeologists,
Yeah.
architectural historians,
Yeah.
postal engineers, industrial hygienists, and the contractor has to submit 50% of these specific names within 30 days of the contract award.
It's intense, though they do build in a buffer for the realities of the labor market. They allow vendors to over-index the minimum roster by up to 40% just to account for attrition.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it operates almost like a supply chain for human capital, where employee turnover is factored into the calculus, sort of like spoilage in a logistics network.
Supply chain for human capital is like the perfect way to phrase it. But I have to push back on the composition of this roster for a second.
Okay, go for it.
Why on earth is FEMA contractually demanding that an archaeologist or an architectural historian be on standby for a Category 5 hurricane? I mean, if a storm surge just leveled a coastal community, the immediate mandate is clearing the rubble, getting the power back on. Having an architectural historian taking notes while people are waiting on temporary housing just feels I don't know, entirely disconnected from the urgency of the moment.
I get why it looks that way, but what's fascinating here is the intersection of rapid disaster recovery and the rigid framework of federal preservation laws.
Okay, how so?
Well, the performance work statement explicitly binds these contractors to the Stafford Act and also environmental protections under 40 CFR.
Right, all the federal regulations.
Exactly. So imagine a federal contractor takes a bulldozer to clear debris in a 200-year-old flooded downtown, but they do it without historical clearance. Or say they trench a massive new drainage system through indigenous lands to divert floodwaters.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, they trigger immediate catastrophic legal consequences.
The resulting federal injunctions would just freeze the entire site.
Exactly. The entire recovery of that town would literally grind to a halt in federal court. And the delay caused by an environmental or historical violation costs magnitudes more, both in dollars and in human suffering, than just keeping an archaeologist on the payroll.
Wow, okay. That really changes the perspective.
Yeah, these niche experts aren't there for academic study, They're basically the legal shield that allows the civil engineers to actually do their jobs without violating federal law.
Because you cannot destroy the town's heritage or environment under the guise of saving the town. That reframes the entire roster for me. Okay, so we know the exact composition of this technical army. The next logistical hurdle is the deployment mechanism itself. The physical reality of placing these experts into a disaster zone is mapped out in the travel requirements, and man, the constraints are punishing.
They really are brutal.
Like when a task order drops, these personnel have between 24 and 48 hours to arrive at their designated temporary duty station.
Right, and just think about the logistical agility required to meet a 24-hour deployment window across a transportation grid that might be completely destroyed.
Yeah, roads are washed out, flights are canceled.
Exactly. And the moment they arrive, their physical existence is micromanaged by the procurement rules.
It really is. The restrictions on where they can sleep read like a punitive contract. The documents explicitly ban any luxury accommodations. But it goes much further than that. It heavily regulates what they call non-conventional lodging. You cannot rent a property that you or a family member owns. You cannot crash with friends and submit for government reimbursement. You can't even sublet a room if you do manage to secure a rental.
Yep, the red tape is thick.
And the operational tempo is just relentless. Deployments are managed through strict 7 to 14-day rotation schedules, and those require pre-approval 14 days in advance. No accrual of days is allowed.
It's a very tight leash.
Let me challenge the pragmatism of this setup, though. We are talking about a region where a hurricane might have wiped out like 80% of the commercial hotel inventory.
Sure.
If lodging is basically non-existent, shouldn't the government be actively encouraging a civil engineer to just crash on their cousin's couch to free up resources? Why bog down the recovery with red tape about property ownership at a time like that?
Looking purely at the physical recovery, I totally agree. It seems completely counterproductive. But the underlying mechanics of federal procurement dictate these rules.
Which mechanics specifically?
Well, the documents stipulate time and materials and firm fixed price structures. This specifically maps to contract line item numbers 0003 and 0004 for travel and other direct costs.
Okay, the Sea Alliance.
Right. And in a time and materials framework, the government essentially agrees to pay for whatever the contractor spends to get the job done up to a certain limit.
Right, so the taxpayer is covering the tab for the lodging.
Exactly. When you inject billions of taxpayer dollars into an environment that is completely stripped of normal oversight and infrastructure, the risk of disaster capitalism is just astronomical.
Oh, right, because people will take advantage.
Right. If the rules permitted contractors to stay with family and claim the maximum federal per diem rate, or, allowed them to rent properties secretly owned by their own LLCs, the resulting fraud would be systemic.
They'd just be paying themselves with federal money.
Exactly. Millions of dollars meant for community recovery would be siphoned off into the private accounts of the contractors' extended networks. So these draconian lodging rules, they're basically the only structural defense the government has against the financial exploitation of a crisis.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because you have this workforce operating under severe physical constraints, right? We've got exhausted structural engineers and cost estimators sleeping in heavily regulated non-luxury conditions, working these grueling 14-day rotations.
So exhaustion is basically guaranteed.
Right. And the natural byproduct of that kind of environment is human error. which is exactly why the digital security mandates in the second half of this document are so aggressively unforgiving. To process claims and evaluate infrastructure, these teams need deep access to federal networks.
Oh, absolutely. The background investigation tiers alone illustrate the friction here.
Yeah.
Depending on the exact system access required, a contractor is subjected to anything from a Tier 1 clearance for low-risk positions, escalating all the way up to Tier 4 for high-risk roles.
Which is serious stuff.
It is, because they are handling a massive daily volume of controlled unclassified information, or CUI, personally identifiable information, and sensitive PII.
And the incident reporting protocols for that data are staggering. Like, if a contractor suspects a data breach involving sensitive PII, they're contractually mandated to report it to the Security Operations Center within exactly 1 hour.
1 hour. It's incredibly tight.
All other incidents are granted an 8-hour window. And if a leak is confirmed, the vendor must provide 18 months of triple bureau credit monitoring for every single affected individual.
Right.
But consider the reality on the ground for a second. A town is under 3 feet of water, cell towers are shredded, and you have an exhausted industrial hygienist who thinks they might have left a laptop in a rental car.
Yeah, a total nightmare scenario.
A 1-hour reporting window in a communication blackout seems functionally impossible.
Yeah.
Does attempting to enforce that level of digital red tape actively impede the physical rescue and recovery?
I mean, it sounds impossible, yes. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at the extreme vulnerability of the local population.
Okay.
Think about it. A disaster victim has lost their home, their physical security, and likely their local support network. To receive federal aid, they have to hand over their entire digital existence to these contractors.
Right, everything. Social security numbers, bank routing information.
Exactly. Detailed medical and insurance histories. The data sitting on those laptops represents the entire financial architecture of a devastated community.
Wow. Yeah, it is a localized concentration of incredibly high-value data moving through a completely unsecured physical environment.
Right. And malicious actors like organized identity theft rings or state-sponsored hackers, they actively monitor disaster zones for exactly this reason.
Because everyone's distracted.
Yes. They prey on the chaotic transfer of data. So the 1-hour reporting window is not about waiting for perfect verification of a breach. It is a strict emergency containment protocol.
Lock it down immediately.
Exactly. The moment a laptop is unaccounted for, the Security Operations Center needs to instantly sever that device's access to the federal network, isolate the local node, and lock down the victim's profile before a stolen hard drive becomes a systemic data hemorrhage.
That makes total sense.
Because a cyber incident layered over a natural disaster permanently destroys whatever capacity that survivor had to rebuild their life.
You're basically managing a digital quarantine zone while the physical town is still underwater. It shifts the perspective entirely, doesn't it? The cybersecurity is as vital to the survivor's future as the structural engineering is.
It really is. You can't have one without the other.
So we've spent a lot of time analyzing how FEMA manages the present reality of disaster response. Mitigating fraud through travel rules, locking down networks, ensuring historical compliance. But the final pages of these PA-TAC VI drafts reveal a profound pivot.
Oh, yes. The technology section.
Yeah, they are legally binding these contractors to the future trajectory of federal technology.
The tech compliance clauses in the latter half of the performance work statement are incredibly forward-looking, especially regarding how vendors deploy software and analytical tools.
Right, so the baseline is strict adherence to Section 508 accessibility requirements, which ensures every piece of software and every public deliverable is fully functional for users with disabilities.
Which is standard, but very important.
Yeah. But immediately following that is this massive, highly detailed artificial intelligence clause. It's rooted in the 2019 National Defense Authorization Act and Executive Order 13960, and it lays down a really rigid legal framework for how algorithms can operate in disaster recovery.
And honestly, the inclusion of EO 13960 in a procurement document of this nature is a huge signal.
Wow, so...
The federal government recognizes the analytical power of AI in processing chaotic data sets, obviously, but they are absolutely terrified of losing operational oversight.
Right, so they mandate 9 specific principles of AI use, and 3 of them really jumped out at me.
Let's hear them.
First, the AI must be understandable by subject matter experts. Second, it must be regularly monitored with the explicit capability to be immediately deactivated if its behavior becomes inconsistent.
A kill switch, basically.
Exactly. And third, it must be accountable, meaning human roles and responsibilities have to be clearly defined for every single stage of the algorithm's deployment. So my question to you is this clause just generic Washington bureaucratic boilerplate, or is FEMA anticipating a near future where an algorithm is actively deciding which ruined hospital qualifies for federal funding?
This raises an important question about the scalability of disaster response. And to answer you directly, it is absolutely not boilerplate.
Really?
Really. The use cases for AI in this specific theater are expanding rapidly. I mean, algorithms are already vastly superior at modeling complex flood patterns from drone telemetry or performing cognitive approximations in massive cost estimation spreadsheets.
Oh, sure.
They can sort through tens of thousands of conflicting damage claims simultaneously. The sheer volume of data generated by a modern disaster easily exceeds human processing capacity.
But those 9 principles effectively put a choke collar on the processing speed, don't they?
They do, but they address the critical vulnerability of algorithmic decision-making, which is the black box effect.
Right, where you don't know how it got the answer.
Exactly. In a commercial setting, if an algorithm optimizes a supply chain route, the mechanics of how it arrived at that route don't necessarily matter as long as it saves money.
Sure.
But in federal disaster recovery, the mechanism is everything. If an AI model denies a multi-million-dollar rebuilding grant for a devastated community's primary care facility, the government cannot legally or ethically tell that community, well, the computer calculated a denial and we don't know the exact math.
Ah, right. The accountability mandate forces a human to own the math.
Exactly. A human subject matter expert must be able to forensically trace the exact data set the AI used, explain the weighting of the variables, and mathematically justify the outcome to a congressional oversight committee, or even just a local mayor.
That's a huge responsibility.
It is. By demanding the AI be understandable, FEMA is ensuring that the inherent biases present in historical disaster data don't silently automate the disenfranchisement of vulnerable communities.
Right, keeping the human empathy in the loop.
Exactly. They are attempting to harness the processing speed of neural networks while legally mandating the traceability of a human engineer.
It's a massive structural tension. Like, they're paying for cutting-edge efficiency, but demanding analog accountability.
That's a great way to put it.
Taking a step back, though, and looking at the totality of the PA-TAC drafts, the sheer scale of the apparatus is staggering. We aren't just looking at a hiring contract here. This is the architectural blueprint for a shadow agency that has to instantly materialize out of the ether the very moment a catastrophic event occurs.
It really is. It requires a deeply integrated network of private sector specialists who are constrained by aggressively rigid travel regulations, subjected to intense digital security clearances, and bound by bleeding-edge technology mandates.
All while operating under extreme physical and emotional duress.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Well, the next time a massive storm system dominates the news cycle and you watch the inevitable press conferences and the footage of pallets being unloaded on the tarmac, try to look past the visible machinery.
Look at the people behind the scenes.
Right. Think about the invisible architecture of recovery that we've explored today. Visualize the architectural historians, the industrial hygienists, the project managers. They are operating out of strictly regulated, non-luxury hotel rooms, racing against 24-hour deployment clocks.
Yeah.
They are navigating unforgiving digital security protocols just to protect survivors' identities and doing the grueling, highly scrutinized mathematics required to pull a community back from the brink. The physical reconstruction of a ruined city doesn't actually begin with heavy machinery.
No, it doesn't.
It begins with a federally cleared cost estimator logging into a secure portal to legally validate a damage claim.
The human element is the single most critical point of failure, and at the same time, the single most vital asset in the entire procurement structure.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, building on that tension between the human element and the technological mandates we discussed.
Yeah.
We saw how aggressively this contract works to keep the human expert firmly in the driver's seat, forcing AI to be understandable, traceable, and accountable.
Right. Very strict human oversight.
But consider the trajectory of global climate patterns.
Yeah.
As catastrophic weather emergencies become more frequent, more intense, and critically start overlapping with one another across different geographic zones, how long will it be before the sheer, overwhelming volume of physical destruction just exceeds the capacity of any human roster to manage?
That is the big question.
Right.
How long until the scale of the math forces FEMA to drop the requirement for human traceability, moving those highly trained civil engineers and architects from being the ultimate decision makers to merely standing by as the bystanders of disaster recovery algorithms? Something to think about the next time the storm clouds gather over your town. That's our deep dive for today. Catch you next time.